Welcome to this meeting of the editorial board of the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. Today we welcome Mayor Cavalier Johnson and County Executive David Crowley. Thank you both for being here this morning.
Thank you for inviting us.
Nice to see you.
I'm Jim Fitzhenry. I'm the Ideas Lab editor for the Journal Sentinel. We hope to cover a lot of ground today because there's a lot going on in our city and the county. And we really want to, again, thank you for being here and hope this is the first of many conversations. A big part of today's meeting is going to be focused in on the shared revenue bill that's being debated in the legislature that's going to have profound implications for Milwaukee. The bill not only sets the level of shared revenue that the city and the county get, but it contains provisions with things exclusively for Milwaukee. Most notably, it gives the city the ability to levy a sales tax and for Milwaukee County to levy additional sales tax revenues. This comes as a backdrop of a major fiscal situation for the city and the county. Local officials are looking at massive budget cuts if they don't get this revenue due to the end of COVID-19 funding, higher costs due to inflation, and decades of stagnant aid from the states. All this complex public policy, this is 133 pages in all, is navigating through divided government in Madison. At the center of this is Mayor Johnson and County Executive Crowley, who recently have spent as much time in Madison as you have in Milwaukee as this is winding its way through. Last fall, an independent, nonpartisan public policy organization, the Wisconsin Public Policy Forum, did a comprehensive review of the city's finances and declared Milwaukee is facing a fiscal reckoning. Just how bad will it get without these additional tax dollars? Let's start with you, Mr. Mayor.
How bad will it get? It'll get really, really bad. I like to point out the fact that the Policy Forum, Wisconsin Policy Forum, has been discussing the problems, the fiscal problems, the financial challenges facing the city of Milwaukee, not just since last year, but they've been discussing it going back to 2009. That's the year that I graduated from college at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So it's been some time. This is not an issue that is new to Milwaukee, to leaders in Madison, or to the state of Wisconsin. So if we don't get this solved, and it's been 20, 30 years in the making, the city of Milwaukee is going to be in a very dire fiscal situation that's going to cause us to eliminate roughly a quarter of all staff at the city. That's going to have tremendous impacts on our ability to deliver public safety, tremendous impacts in police response and fire response, tremendous impact on our public library and so many other places. So it's really, really important that we get this issue solved and we get it solved now.
Mr. County Executive?
Well, I would just echo what the mayor just said. If we do not have the ability to bring in additional revenues for Milwaukee County, it's going to be very difficult, not just for us to make the investments in the programs and services that people rely on, but to be quite honest, it's going to be difficult for us to actually to invest in the quality of life for the folks who not only live here, but come here to work and play at the same time. And so when you think about Milwaukee County, we support our criminal justice system. Our county courthouse is the nervous system of the criminal justice system in a sense. And we don't want to slow down justice. We want to move justice along. And so, if we don't receive these dollars, many of the programs, when we think about transit, when we think about our parks, when we think about senior services, disability services, youth services, it's going to be very difficult for us to actually invest in these programs. And so looking at a $109 million gap by 2027, and that's not even including the current gap we have within the Milwaukee County transit system, is going to be very difficult for Milwaukee County to invest in its people and those that rely on us.
There's been obviously a lot of conversation around the logistics. I guess I wanted to take a step back. Whose fault is it that Milwaukee County are in this situation? Do either the city or the county bear any responsibility for this?
I would say that when we think about who is responsible for all of this, none of this matters at this moment. We are now butting up against a fiscal cliff within the city and city of Milwaukee. But if you want to talk about what is the perfect storm that created this, we can go back to the fact that shared revenue has been declining, has been stagnant for at least 20 years. We've been having this conversation. Local municipalities don't have the tools or leverage to pull to increase revenues. We've had at the county the vehicle registration fees, and we have a $30 wheel tax that we have implemented years ago. But we want to make sure that whatever we can do to move this forward, to fix our fiscal position, we need it to happen at a grand scale, and the local option sales tax is the way to do it. But I would also, say that when we think about our pension, City of Milwaukee and Milwaukee County are the only municipalities within the state of Wisconsin with their own pension systems. And when we think about the $300 million that we collect in property taxes, a third of that goes towards our pension alone. And so it's a combination of many different things. But right now, where we are at this moment is, how do we fix this? Not just for the City of Milwaukee and Milwaukee County, but many municipalities across this state need additional revenues to make the proper investment.
And I would echo those comments. As I said, this is 20, 30 years in the making, right? So it doesn't matter who sat in any seat in any level of government. Those folks aren't here now. We're here right now, and the legislature is here right now, and the governor is here right now. It's incumbent upon us to fix it so that we can continue to provide public safety, so that we can continue to provide opportunities for the police to patrol, so we can continue to provide opportunities for the fire department to respond to critical life-saving incidents, and so that we can continue to provide opportunities for our library to serve the youngest learners in Milwaukee. Regardless of who was where at what time, the issue is here right now, and it's up to us to solve it.
Well, I guess I asked that question because so often we hear legislators say, well, Milwaukee created this problem. They're in this situation because their common council, because their elected leaders have made mistakes.
Well, I think it's unfair to characterize as this is just a Milwaukee problem when you have, again, all municipalities who are asking the state legislature for increased insured revenue. Yes, we have a City of Milwaukee specific issue, but no municipality is as large or as diverse as the City of Milwaukee and Milwaukee County. And so when we think about the issues facing us, all municipalities are facing the exact same issue. When we think about the scale of the issue, it's a little bit different for us because of, again, that population. And so I think it's unfair to characterize this as any type of bailout, because this is giving us the ability to leverage our economic activity to actually make the proper investments. It is unfortunate when you think about Milwaukee and the City of Milwaukee and Milwaukee County. A fourth of the visitors who come into our state are coming right here. Yet, while they spend those dollars, while they're enjoying themselves, it doesn't give us the ability to leverage those dollars being spent to invest in our own communities.
Yeah, those dollars are collected by Madison and then distributed to communities around the state, right? So we're not able to do what other large cities, other large jurisdictions across the United States have the ability to do, and that's take advantage of our own economy. I mean, just think about a couple of years ago when the Milwaukee Bucks were in the playoffs, right? Every home game here was basically a $3 million economic stimulus, and that's great for the state, to a very, very small, minuscule degree for Milwaukee County. But those folks were coming here, they were protected by Milwaukee police officers. Those folks who were coming here, if they had a medical emergency, they would have been responded to by the Milwaukee Fire Department. If they drove here, they used streets that are maintained by the Department of Public Works. City of Milwaukee taxpayers doing all that stuff, and nobody paying anything into it. You mentioned the Wisconsin Policy Forum and their leader, Rob Henkin. I always point out Rob Henkin. He's like test subject number one in this, as somebody who lives in the suburbs, who works in the city, uses city services each and every single day, but pays $0 into supporting those city services. We should be in a position in Milwaukee where we're able to take advantage of folks who are coming in, whether they're tourists, whether they're commuters or whatnot, to generate revenue to invest in our own services here at the local level.
Can I ask, how concerned are you about the sort of the opposite effect of if you're a city resident or someone else, instead of coming to Milwaukee to buy a car or go to Kohl's or shopping, that they're going to just say, I don't want to pay this extra amount. I'm going to go buy the car in Waukesha, or I'm going to go buy it in Ozaukee County, because they can avoid, paying this extra cost that would be on them if these increases go through.
Well, I mean, I think that people will still make purchases in Milwaukee, right? I think that'll still happen, just like people still travel for destinations in Chicago or other places that have a larger sales tax. Even if we get the increase that would be beneficial for us in the City of Milwaukee and Milwaukee County, we still overall would not be over the line in terms of cities comparable size in the Midwest, right? And there still is economic activity that happens in those places too. I suspect that the same thing will happen here in Milwaukee.
And I also want to just point out, I mean, when we think about the list of tax-exempted items that are out there, when we talk about services, we talk about groceries, we talk about certain things, there are tax exemptions that are there. But when we look at the data, we're not going to be the first community to raise our sales taxes. And I think that when we looked at the data, we did see a drop in the way that people had spent money. But over time, probably within the year, the spending within those communities actually had an uptick, because what ends up happening, to be quite honest with you, is that everybody else decides that they're going to raise their prices as well. But at the same time, this is about convenience, right? People are going to spend those dollars right here in our own backyard, especially knowing if it gives them the ability to make those investments. So we talk about buying a car, right? You buy a car in the city of Milwaukee, that increase in sales tax now has the ability to help fill those potholes, to help bring more law enforcement officers, to bring more whatever may be to the table to make sure that we can deliver for the people that we represent.
So one of the key questions right now is this issue of do the voters have to approve any increase, or can it be done by the Common Council and the County Board? So in your minds, each of you, do you think there's a scenario that either one of those wouldn't pass? I mean, would the County Board or the Common Council reject a tax increase, or would the general public reject a tax increase?
So when we think about, the increase, I mean, for the past 40 years, you've had 68 counties that have already made the decision to increase their sales tax by a half a percent. And so for the mayor and I, not to speak for the mayor, he is right here, I think that we want to continue with that same precedent. But this is also an issue of time. When we talk about going to referendum, it's going to take a lot of resources and a lot of time to make sure that we go to the public. And it's not to say it's not going to take resources and time to even talk to the Common Council and the County Board, because we need to make sure that whatever space we're talking about through referendum or through enabling legislation, that we're informing the public of exactly what is happening. And so including the ability to do enabling legislation gives the city of Milwaukee and Milwaukee County a little bit more certainty about how we move in the future.
I would concur, and I'd say this as well. I'm not speaking for the Milwaukee Common Council, but just knowing past history of the council, when there are big, difficult questions before the council, in order to make sure that the city is in the best possible position, the council has always stepped up and done the right thing. And I would suspect that the council will do the same thing here as well.
So just on the timing, so in theory, the council or the board could get this approved in a matter of a month or two, whereas to put it on the ballot, it's going to take many months.
Correct.
I hear this question all the time, and we've been talking about this, that this has been out here for quite some time, 20, 30 years. We've been talking about this, but nothing has been done. And now we say it's really dire. But I'm getting a sense from people that they don't feel as dire as you guys are saying it is. Tell me what we could expect to see if this cliff happens, if we go over the cliff. Will we lose like 150 officers? What would happen? And don't just use scare tactics. What would it look like?
Certainly. I guess I'll start off here. If we don't get the resources necessary, a number of things would happen. Again, as I alluded to earlier, we'd be in the position where we have to lay off like roughly a fourth of all City of Milwaukee employees. That's going to have devastating effects on the police. It's going to have devastating effects in the fire department. It would have devastating effects in our library system as well. We're not talking about just 50 cops or 100 officers or 200 officers. We're talking about several hundred police officers. And so for folks who are concerned about police response presently, just imagine how that response time would increase if there's 400 or 500 officers who are no longer on the beat. I remember just last year when we were preparing the city budget for this year, not knowing, we were obviously working at this, but not knowing that we'd be this close in order to get this done, so that we could ease into these cuts and not just have a fall off the cliff moment when it happened. We proposed some modest cuts to the fire department. I know that there was some concern, even concern amongst members of the Common Council, that the fire department is the one that responds to people who are shot non-fatally and provides life-saving aid to them so that those non-fatal shootings don't turn into homicides. Well, the likelihood that those folks who are shot non-fatally would end up dying because they're not getting the response, I think increases if you have a couple hundred firefighters who are no longer on the job. And, just, James, you certainly, I think, are aware that just a couple of Fridays ago, we broke ground on the Martin Luther King Jr. Drive Library. Right, the city of Milwaukee has been investing in our library system for a number of years, over a decade, and we finally are at MLK Library. And this is something that's important to me. I know it's important to the local alderperson there. I served on the library board too, and I was really looking forward to this. And so we're finally here. It's happening at MLK. If we don't get the resources necessary, what happens to the library system? What happens to the library system? I don't want it to be that when we put the shovel in the ground to break ground on that library, that it wasn't actually digging the grave for the system. Right? I want it to be that library is open, that we're able to service people, that they can continue to be innovative and have some of our youngest learners to come into those places. If not, then the future of the library is bleak, and that's not a future that I want to see. I want to have increased police response. People want that. I want to have a robust fire department. And I want to have a library system that serves people throughout Milwaukee.
Yeah, not receiving these dollars would be very dire for Milwaukee County. So again, we talked about the criminal justice and having the public safety continuum, which is a responsibility for counties all across the state of Wisconsin. So when you think about pretrial services, you think about our jail, you think about the Community Reintegration Center, just with public safety alone, those systems will be impacted. And we're not even talking about the non-mandated programs, some of the best used and many used amenities right here within Milwaukee County. So when you think about our Parks Department, the crown jewel of what we have right here within Milwaukee County, we already have about $500 million in deferred maintenance there. So you can just imagine how much will be added on to that deferred maintenance moving forward. We have a Milwaukee County transit system that gets people not just throughout the county, but even gets with a partnership with Waukesha, gets them to those employment opportunities. We will have to take a close look at what cuts will have to come down the pipeline. But we're not even talking about senior services. We're not talking about youth services, disability services, all the other things that helps us to attract workers and also retain people who currently work within Milwaukee County. And so if we want to invest in the quality of life, this is going to take this deal getting done, because if we don't have it, you can make any bet that we'll start to see the quality of life within Milwaukee County start to dwindle.
So you just painted a dire picture. So Milwaukee needs this money. I mean, I think we all know that. But this bill has a lot of stipulations and things kind of not related to shared revenue or the sales tax. I know you guys have spoken out. You're not in favor of making the sales tax a referendum question for a few reasons. Are there any other things in this bill that you're still kind of fighting to have amended or changed before it is passed?
Well, I will tell you that both the county executive and myself, we have spent so much time in Madison and continue to spend a lot of time in Madison. Like, I'm there tomorrow, county executive, I think you're there Wednesday. Yep. So we continue to go back and forth to Madison to have these very, very important conversations. And both he and I were sitting across the table from legislative leaders and announcing to them our displeasure, our strong aversion to the local provisions that affect Milwaukee. So I want it to be loud and clear, and the county executive can speak on this as well. I want it to be loud and clear that both the county executive, myself, the county board chairwoman, the county council president, all of us have stood up and said that as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion provisions, as it relates to the maintenance of efforts, and where the police are deployed and how our fire and police commission is made up, when it concerns efforts around local transit options here, we have spoken out against those. We did those privately in negotiations with legislative leaders. We did that publicly at the opportunities to testify at committee hearings, both on the Assembly side and on the Senate side, and have done it in the media as well. So nobody should be under any illusion that both the county executive and myself have been the very first ones to say that we do not like these local provisions that would affect Milwaukee and Milwaukee County. So, we certainly would desire to have those local provisions removed from the bill.
Absolutely. And I mean, great job, because he basically nailed it on the head. But the other thing that I would say is that the other things that particularly at Milwaukee County is the actual increase to the 0.5% to make sure that this is going to help fix our fiscal situation moving forward. But also the enabling legislation. I think that's going to be key in making sure that we get this done on time, and making sure that we begin to actually bring these new revenues into our systems to pay for the services that people deserve.
I'm a little curious. How do you convince, like, deep-rooted Republicans that diversity and inclusion, where they stand on it and where you stand on it is night and day? What are you saying to them to convince them that say, hey, that doesn't make sense to us? What does that conversation sound like?
Well, so, and I'll let the mayor go into it. So, particularly at the county level, we don't have as many restrictions related to DEI as the city does. And so, for us, when it came down to really negotiating and having the conversation about why DEI was important, one, I had to talk about the fact that we had an Office of African American Affairs, and as an African American, we changed it from OA to the Office of Equity because we wanted to make sure that we weren't just focusing on racial demographics. We wanted to focus on gender. We want to focus on ability status. We want to work with our municipalities and our business. I mean, you have the MMAC who has a goal to focus on the region of choice to increase people of color in managerial positions as well, and in C-suite positions. And so as we began to have those conversations, I think some of them were able to get it, but I think a lot of the times that we're seeing related to DEI is this national conversation that is happening. And so for us, it's really about making the case, the business case. I mean, when you think about many different businesses, and not to say that businesses aren't being attacked as well, just hearing what, just about Chick-fil-A, right, about their DEI efforts, we have to continue to have this conversation about being inclusive. And when we think about our economy, we need to make sure that the city of Milwaukee and Milwaukee County has the ability to invest in DEI because it helps to grow our local economy, which in turn improves the state economy.
So this is a pivotal moment in a lot of ways for the city and the county and the state, essentially. You get this money. Let's say you get your sales tax. Mm-hmm. What does that look like? And how directly, you get to save the jobs. But talk about quality of life in terms of that, because I think all these things really boil down to people are afraid of violence. They live in fear. Children are being killed. I mean, let's talk about sort of how it hits home, and not the political part of it, but what does that look like? What is that 2%? What is that? What are the next steps of success look for? How do you help the city that's struggling at this very, very pivotal moment? Because if it goes one way, things could get better. If it doesn't, there's no way things will get better. And 20-year span of this, imagine more of that.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. I've been kind of alluding to it in the conversation here as well. You touched on the issue of public safety, right? Talk about quality of life. Like when somebody is in a dangerous situation, when somebody is in fear for what might happen, if they think some harm may come to them or somebody that they care about, they're getting on the phone and they're calling the police. They're calling the police. And they want their neighborhoods to be stable and to be served by law enforcement officers, right? Having the opportunity to have this increase in the sales tax allows us to maintain and then increase services in the police department so that folks can have the certainty that when they call 911, when they need an officer to respond, that response will be there. When folks have an incident in their neighborhood, whether there's a structural fire that they don't want coming into their neighbor's property or onto their own, or more so these days, if there's a life-saving medical response that needs to be rendered, it's the Milwaukee Fire Department that comes out and does that, right? And so having this 2% sales tax puts us in a position where we're able to preserve and increase those services. And just last week or maybe 2 weeks ago, it's all a blur, following him around. But we had our inaugural Milwaukee Peace Week, and one of the key focuses of that week was talking about all the opportunities that we have in Milwaukee, because really we are resource rich in Milwaukee. There's so many opportunities for young people with nonprofit organizations. I was saying that if young people want to play basketball, if they want to swim, if they are hungry, need free meals, if they want a work opportunity, if they want to read, all these things are available to them now. And on the reading part, our libraries do that. So if folks want to have opportunities for their kids to not have the summer slide, school's getting ready to end, and they want their kids to be able to continue on with their academic achievement. If they want to have access to computers to update their resumes to get back into the workforce, or to improve on their computer skills, or if they want a place that is cool in the summertime that they can go to and have a reprieve from the heat. Libraries provide all of those things. And having the 2% sales tax allows us to be able to keep libraries open. All of those things are integral to a strong quality of life in neighborhoods all across Milwaukee. That's what that would do. That's what that would do for us. And I think down the line as well, it also puts us in a position of fiscal stability. It puts us in a position of fiscal stability so that we can make the investments necessary to encourage additional business growth in Milwaukee that adds more family supporting jobs so that people who live in neighborhoods that formerly were well served by heavy manufacturing jobs, they have access to good paying jobs. You create stability in those neighborhoods. You get a critical mass of stability happening with folks with family supporting jobs that buy their homes, and folks are not transient. And when folks are not transient, they develop these familial relationships with the folks that they're around, and they start looking out for each other. They become like family, and that's how you get to real public safety. And that's what the 2% sales tax allows us to be able to do.
In part, yeah, I agree with you. But I think, I think the biggest cry that I always hear from people is that they're scared, or they're afraid, or they're worried about their families. And both of you are raising families here. I think sometimes all of the talk of the governmental process gets in the way of the fundamentals of this. You want to have a safe, stable environment for people to raise their children, to visit, to shop, to do business in the city. Once that's off kilter, it's really a spiral. So your challenges are great. In 3 months, in 6 months, what do you want to say? What do you want to be able to say that you've done to slow the process, heal the wounds, continue to put, this medicine in, or to make this a better city?
Yeah, I mean, if we're able to do this, in 6 months we can go and say that this is a crisis that had been averted. They were having this conversation at the federal level with raising the debt ceiling, right? It's in some ways similar here. Like, we are up against a financial wrecking point, and we don't want to hit that. And so having the opportunity to have the 2% sales tax puts us in a position to avoid those things, to preserve quality of life in Milwaukee, and for us to be able to maintain the services that people both rely on and quite frankly expect and deserve here in our community.
Mayor, can I just jump in really quick? So you talked about public safety. The bill, one of the policy requirements in the bill is that there's a maintenance of effort on police and fire. And so when you answered Jill's question about whether you don't get a sales tax, I think that assumes that also the bill hasn't passed, right? So what does this look like if let's say the bill does pass, but you don't get a sales tax, you have a maintenance of effort, and that's a major source of, that would be one of the departments you would cut, or two of the major departments. So what does that even look like? Because
those are non-revenue generating departments, and so really there's only so many places that we can go to cut to cut. Police and fire certainly are ones, and ones, by the way, that we've kind of held harmless over the years, right? We've tried not to have impacts on police. With fire, there have been certainly more cuts over time, but we've tried not to hit fire too hard as well. It's not just those. As another example, in the Department of Public Works, a parking checker, for instance, let's say they earn, an individual parking checker, let's say they earn $60,000 a year, but they collect themselves $100,000 worth of parking tickets. Well, if you cut them, then you're actually losing money, right? So to your point about a maintenance of effort, that is key. That's critical. And with some of the conversations that I've had with alders, I think that's really started to open their eye about the importance of making sure that we do what I believe is the right thing and have enabling legislation, them voting for it, me signing that legislation as the executive. And a key part of that is the maintenance of effort, right? Because with all the policy provisions that we discussed earlier, when the bill is signed, even though we're fighting to get those things out, and we, like I said, we're going to Madison, we will continue to fight to get those things out. Those things, though, they become law anyway. So the only question that'd be before the county board and the common council is whether or not we accept the resources that we need to keep our governments afloat and preserve our services. That maintenance of effort is there. So if we do not have the additional dollars, we're still locked into a maintenance of effort with no additional money to fund that effort. And if we don't hit those numbers, then the state would cut the shared revenue that we presently get. So we'd be in a financial death spiral. Exactly. If we don't do that. That is a conversation I've been having with alders that I think has really been helping to open their eyes to this.
Let me ask if I could to pick up on what Joe was asking about and driving at. I think so. As a homeowner and resident of the city, if this all goes through and you get the sales tax increases, are things going to just stay the same or get better? And is this just about not it getting any worse? I mean, is there really money there to invest to get potholes filled quicker, to get more programs to keep kids off the streets? Or is this just going to keep it to where it is today and not have this plummet after the cliff?
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. So, yes, it would allow for us to maintain the services that we presently have. The maintenance of effort causes us to increase the number of firefighters and police officers from the present levels up to a certain amount. So there would be an increase there, which means better response times that I was alluding to before. And we've seen in recent history in Wisconsin that sales tax continues to grow, and so that should be presenting an opportunity for us to make other investments as well.
So, can I jump in? If you did have, let's say, more money, crime is a big issue in Milwaukee right now. We just had a 1-year-old baby killed over the weekend. I think the 10th juvenile killed in Milwaukee this year. So beyond more police officers, what would you guys do with that money or your current money to help address some of these issues in Milwaukee?
Yeah, certainly. So I think all of us around this circle understand that public safety is not an issue where there's a silver bullet. There's not one thing that you can do to affect public safety. It's a multi-pronged approach. I think all of us understand that. So certainly police are a key part of that. And I've supported the police and their budgets since I've been mayor. That's certainly one part of it. But it's not just that. That's why I asked for mentors and friends and pastors and parents to step up to be a part of the solution here as well. That's why we have our violence prevention staff out in the communities across Milwaukee distributing gun locks and encouraging people to take a different route forward in their life and make better decisions. That's why we continue to call for these same folks that we're working with here on getting the resources that we need, calling on those folks to understand the role that they play in this too, because we don't control gun law at the local level in Milwaukee or in any municipality in Wisconsin. That's a state level and federal level responsibility. So I need them to come on board and realize that they've got a role to play in reducing gun violence in Milwaukee too. And just like I referred to earlier, for our inaugural Milwaukee Peace Week, we were alerting the public, young people and their families, to all the awesome opportunities that are available in this community right now. And by the way, you don't have to go and research things yourself. All you got to do is call one place or email one place. That's Safe and Sound. Safe and Sound will be the connective tissue in this community to get young people and their parents connected with resources all across Milwaukee, do all those things that I won't repeat again here. But so it's all of these things working in tandem that would help us to increase safety that we'd be able to make further investments in.
And the only thing that I would add to that is that while the mayor is rightfully so talking about public safety and how we need law enforcement, we also have to focus on the root causes of what puts people in position to make some of these decisions that they're making related to crime. And so by investing in the social determinants of health, right, investing in housing, things that we want to do at the county, transportation, employment, we want to be able to use many of those savings that we'll see on the back end to make those proper investments. I mean, when you think about the city of Milwaukee and Milwaukee County, for generations, we have seen many different types of disinvestments through many different neighborhoods throughout the decades. And so it is time for us to make a decision and really start to make some investments. And this will give us the ability some flexibility to do just that.
And can I touch on, so the county executive touched on housing, and both he and I have had housing instability growing up. You may know that we spent some time in high school together as well,
Yes.
And have known each other for some time. When we were growing up, we moved around a lot. And so under his leadership as county executive, under my leadership as council president, now mayor, both of our governments are making sizable investments in housing, because we understand what I was talking about earlier, right? Is if folks have access to stability in their homes and it yields to stability in neighborhoods, then that's how you get to the overall public safety that all of us want to see.
I'm glad you brought that up, because as two black men, you know the statistics for African Americans in the city, because it's long considered one of the worst places to live if you're African American and raise a child. You could look at graduation rates and go on and on. If you don't receive this funding, this funding that we all desperately need, what would your comment be to the African American community that's already struggling here? I mean, what would you tell them?
That's a great question. When when I think about where I grew up at, and still go to some of these same communities today, they are struggling. But I think folks need to understand that without these additional revenues, it's going to be an even bigger crisis. When we think about housing, when we think about crime, when we think about being able to invest again in our transit system to get people to family-sustaining wages, right? And so, for me, what I would tell them is that the fight isn't over. Being the first African Americans in executive positions within the city of Milwaukee County, it is tough having to do some of these negotiations, and tough changing the narrative and getting people to understand where Milwaukee has come from, who we are today, and what the future holds for us if we have the ability to make these proper investments. But this is about, particularly when you talk about communities of color, the black community, we have to make sure that folks understand that their voice matters, and making sure that they are participating in the democratic process is extremely important moving forward. It's extremely important now. Not just to make sure that we have local leadership that's going to continue to fight for local municipalities, but making sure that we have representatives in Madison as well as in the federal level who are going to push the policies that directly impact many of these communities. When you talk about generations of disinvestment that I was speaking of, this is exactly what I'm speaking to. Growing up on 23rd and Burleigh, I've seen the tale of two counties. I've seen the tale of two cities. But we have an opportunity, not just for our region, but for the entire state with this, once-in-a-generation lifetime to infuse more dollars. So we have to take advantage of where we are right now, because if we don't receive these dollars, again, it's going to have a negative impact, and not just for black residents, but for residents all across the county.
How do you get people to care? Not people that, you or I, we would care. How do you sell this to people who don't always get it? You're talking about, you both have gone through some housing instability in your lives. That's a story worth telling. You're sitting here now. How do you get people to stop the political noise and see the people? Because I think that's what this really should always be about, right? It should be about the people. It should be about the quality of life. It should be about better services. Folks, the young kids that are taking advantage of the programs you're mentioning, their mothers and fathers are there, or grandmas or somebody's there already. It's the kids that never get to that place in space. How do you get the people who don't vote to listen to something? I think that's a huge challenge, and as two black men, probably even bigger. I don't know that it's a question you can easily answer, but it's something I think about, across the board, not just about Milwaukee.
It's definitely not a question that's easy to answer. But what I would say, for me, one quote comes to mind is that no one cares what you know until they know how much you care.
There you go.
And so a lot of the times as elected officials, as community leaders, business leaders, no matter where you are, you have to step outside your comfort zone and actually go build relationships with the people that you're trying to create the biggest impact within their lives. And so for me, is making sure that I'm constantly in the community, talking to folks. And when you think about, when I first got elected, COVID-19 was at the height of everything. We had to focus on health and safety of everybody. But then as we began to move forward, looking at our fiscal situation, we had to be honest with ourselves. And I told my administration that we really have to focus on managing expectations, because we've been able to do so much good on a shoestring budget. And right now we're in a position to where, we're going to have to cut off a major limb in order to provide these services moving forward. So we have to actually go down to the grassroots level and help make the connection of how this affects their household. Like you talk about the foundation of Milwaukee County is solid, but the house that has been built, it's a little, it needs some renovating. And so if this house is on fire, it's only going to bring a fire closer to you. But if we can take care of this right now, if we can do this as a community, imagine the ripple effect of how much better that we can be, not just as Milwaukee, but this entire region, this entire state.
And there's part of the reason why I spend so much time as mayor in schools, talking directly to young people. You're trying to get our youngest learners in our community to understand the importance of this. That's one way that long term, and I think some of these things will take time, right? That's one of the ways that long term we get folks invested. And I think, for the fact that, Dave is the first person of color, first African American to be county executive. I'm the first person of color, first African American to serve as mayor in elected capacity. Well, I guess both of us in terms of elected capacity. Same guy. Marvin Pratt served as interim mayor as well as county executive. But I'm making those efforts right now to have an impact in the future. And now, with the two of us in the positions that we're in, now in a city that's majority people of color, over 60% person of color, now those kids, they can see the reflection here. They can see the reflection. And I hope that helps to draw them in, for them to care more, and for them to know that they too have a space in Milwaukee at the highest levels, whether that's county executive or governor. I'm sorry, or mayor, rather.
And you know what, just to add on to that, I mean, when you talk about government, when we talk about communities of color, they've had a reason to kind of be on the outside. They've never really trusted government, right? And when you think about Milwaukee, our vision is that by achieving racial equity, we can become the healthiest county in the state of Wisconsin. And with Milwaukee County becoming the first jurisdiction to declare racism as a public health crisis, it was a bold statement to say that as black people, as Latinos, as Asians, as people of color, you are at the center of trying to make some of the changes, because we've seen the historical disinvestments in many of these communities. And I think that with the change in not just leadership, but the way that we message the policy, the way we talk about, if we lift up some of the, making sure that when the tide rises, all the boats rise, people are seeing them being a part of the solution. The diversity of boards, the diversity of administrations that we both have shows people that we are going to be rowing in the right direction to make sure that they can believe in government again, particularly local government. Because it doesn't matter whether you're Republican, Democrat, or don't care about politics in general. You want your garbage picked up. You want those potholes filled. You want emergency services to come when you make that phone call. Or if you're looking for mental health services or housing services, that somebody is there, and that's what matters. And so we want to make sure that people understand that we want to be very inclusive. We want to make sure that we're growing the diversity within Milwaukee County and the city of Milwaukee, because it shows that everyone matters. It doesn't matter your skin color, what zip code you live in, or who you love.
And I guess that leads to another question, which is, diversity, equity, and inclusion has been important. I know you and I have talked a lot about investment in in businesses. I think, Mayor, you and I have talked a little bit about that as well. I was curious what you make of, the restrictions specifically on the city of Milwaukee as it relates to DEI, even as the RNC contract specifically commits to working with diverse businesses and Milwaukeeans.
It's funny that you bring that up, because when I sit across, the table or hear, these desires to cut out diversity, equity, and inclusion by elected leaders on the Republican side, and then I see the Republican National Convention that I was one of the biggest cheerleaders, the county executive myself. Like, we were the biggest cheerleaders in working to get that convention here, to get the eyes of the country and the world on Milwaukee, to have $200 million or whatever the estimate is of economic activity happening here, and the RNC itself, the national committee, working to drive home the point that diversity, equity, and inclusion is important, right? And then to be in this position where Republicans at the state level are trying to squash that. I thought there was some interesting irony there. I thought was some interesting irony as well that the Republican Party of Wisconsin decided to open up and keep open offices in predominantly communities of color in Milwaukee, on the south side in predominantly Latino neighborhoods, and right at North Avenue and MLK in Bronzeville, right? So you're saying, you're putting out this message that you value diversity, you value equity, you want people of color to be involved in this party that I would assume that they would want to be a big tent. But then on the other end, that's not being carried out. So there are some, I think, troubling and conflicting messages coming from Republicans right now.
Have you had that conversation with Speaker Voss or the Senate Majority Leader?
I don't think the conversation ever stops. Right?
Yeah, right.
Let me ask on sort of what these negotiations really look like, right? Because you guys are at the table, right? You're going back and forth to Madison, but isn't the reality they can reach this agreement with or without you, and you guys are kind of left with whatever they get through the legislature and whatever Governor Evers signs? I mean, what's your leverage point when you're in Madison? What do you say? Like, I really want this to be included or taken out. What's your leverage point to get them to say, he's right, or is it strictly sort of this is wrong intellectually, or it's wrong for fairness? But do you have any leverage point where you can, sort of really get something changed in those negotiations?
Well, I think the fact that we're at a point, and the county executive alluded to this as well, that the financial challenges that are affecting the city of Milwaukee and Milwaukee County, they get talked about a lot because we're the largest jurisdictions in the state, or the largest county in the state, just shy of 1 million people, largest city in the state, where roughly 1 in 10 Wisconsinites live, in the city of Milwaukee, right? So our issues are, under a microscope and blown up just because of the sheer size of our jurisdictions. But when you talk about, any leverage that we may have, I think the goal here is to make sure that there is a package that is available to help all communities around the entire state of Wisconsin, right? So this is not a simply Milwaukee issue. It's an issue for communities across the entire state. And so while Republicans have certainly majorities in both the Assembly as well as the Senate, I mean, they can certainly pass pieces of legislation on their own. And the governor would be in a position to sign those things if he so chose. The fact of the matter is that we're building something that's of benefit and has to be of benefit to the entire state of Wisconsin. I think that on the backstop, the governor realizes that as well, that this has to be something for the entire state of Wisconsin.
And I would just add on to that and pretty much echo the same comments as him, is that we do have Democrats as well as Republicans who want to do the right thing with this bill. And so I would say those individuals who are elected in the State House is our leverage, as well as the governor, because we need something that's going to be palatable for everyone across the entire state of Wisconsin. We don't want the city of Milwaukee and Milwaukee County to be the reasons why other communities don't get a shared revenue. And I think it's unfair to those other communities to look at us as the reason why they don't get what they need. Because at the end of the day, again, there are two different needs that the rest of the state has and that we have. Shared revenue alone is not going to fix our problems. It's not going to fix the structural gap that we see. And this is the reason why we've brought the local option sales tax to the table, because this is the only thing that helps that scale. And so it is our hope that we continue to work with Republicans as well as Democrats in the Senate, as well as the governor's office, to figure out what is palatable to get something passed.
So both of you are facing an election next April, right? Mm-hmm. So if, say, this doesn't get through and it just implodes, should voters hold you guys responsible?
If it doesn't pass?
Yep.
I would just say, one, let's recognize that this is a historic moment. I mean, for 20, 30 years, this is the first time that we've been able to have a conversation about, increasing shared revenue. And I like to think that one of the reasons why is because of the mayor and I, we stepped outside of our geographical comfort zone, began to build relationships, not just with state legislators, but other local communities across the state who are having the same problem. If we don't get something passed, this is not the city of Milwaukee and Milwaukee County's fault. We inherited issues like many other elected officials across the state did. But if no one in the state doesn't get what they need to provide the services for the people that they represent, I think the only place to blame is the state legislature and is Madison, not as a city, but the legislative process in Madison, for the simple fact that for 25, 30 years, we've been sounding the alarm at the local level. We need help. And at the end of the day, when you think about the amount of money that has went to Madison from Milwaukee, we've increased our wages. We've increased the amount of dollars that we send to Madison, yet that hasn't come back in return to us. And so it'd be hard-pressed to say that this is our fault. But I also know that being the county executive, I am the one whose shoulders this falls on. But again, this is about going back to the community, going back to the voters. When I decided to run for this seat in the first place, and making the case that I'm still here for them, and we're going to fight tooth and nail and making sure that we bring resources back.
Yeah, it is. It's our responsibility to work to make sure that we solve the problem, right? This is an issue that's affecting every community across the entire state of Wisconsin, not just simply the city of Milwaukee, not just simply Milwaukee County. It's affecting every jurisdiction, and so it's incumbent upon us to do what we need to do as leaders of our jurisdictions to go out there and get the fix. And so we will continue to work at that. But it's not a problem that we created, it's one that we inherited. And we're stepping into it, and we're also stepping up in order to solve the problem. So when it comes to the question of the election next year, there's a reason why across the state we've become the ones who've been the face in this, because we actually stepped outside of our jurisdictions and have been fighting not only to preserve opportunities for us to deliver services, but also for communities around the region and around the state to do the same thing.
So which do you see as a bigger political liability going into April 2024? Enabling legislation, taking this decision from voters and making it yourselves, or giving voters the decision, but having to make that case while you're running for re-election?
Well, so when you say taking it away from voters, I think there's some, we're seeking consistency here. When communities around the state implement, as the county executive pointed out earlier, there are 72 counties in the state of Wisconsin. 68 of those counties have instituted a 0.5% sales tax. That didn't go out to referendum. That was voted on by a simple majority of those county boards in those 68 counties that decided to do that. When communities, I believe, implement a Pratt tax, there is a mechanism, I believe, where the local legislative body actually votes on that too. So we're seeking the same sort of consistency here, except for us, in terms of a Pratt tax, it's not to just simply to take advantage of a resort. Like, this is a dire financial situation that we're in to preserve and increase the services that our citizens here in the city of Milwaukee rely on and deserve, that our visitors, and a quarter of all visitors to Wisconsin, they interface with this state. In Milwaukee, we're the largest tourist destination in the state of Wisconsin. They deserve these services as well. Our daily commuters who come in from the WOW counties each day for work and play and you name it, they deserve these same services as well. And some of the most iconic businesses in the entire state of Wisconsin, they're here. They're headquartered right here. They're growing right here in the city of Milwaukee, and they deserve these services as well. So those are the ones that we're fighting to make sure that we preserve services for.
And the biggest liability is actually doing nothing. Right? Doing absolutely nothing would be the biggest liability, because whether we are in these seats or not, the next person or ourselves will be telling people these cuts are coming down the pipeline and they're going to be drastic and they're going to affect your quality of life. So doing nothing is the biggest liability that we have. We need to make sure that we can bring these revenues back, again, so we can make the proper investments in our own community.
Mayor Johnson, when you spoke to the Rotary Club last week, you talked about the number of large companies that were making big investments in downtown, that were bringing jobs into a big city, which is not happening in a lot of cities across the country. We posted an op-ed this morning from the Greater Milwaukee Committee where they supported the shared revenue bill. What are you hearing from the business community about this? Because they would be a big stakeholder in what happens here in investing the dollars. What are you hearing from business leaders?
Well, I'll tell you, the business community is squarely on our side here. And they, via the MMAC and individual businesses too, they understand what's at stake here, right? If a company like Northwestern Mutual, for instance, is making a $500 million investment in the city of Milwaukee, consolidating its workforce here, adding jobs here, in addition to the $500 million investment they made some years ago, they want to make sure that there are adequate city services. If Milwaukee Tool, that is growing jobs, brand new jobs, and they were going to go and had the opportunity to go anywhere in the region or anywhere in the country, but decided to grow those jobs in the city of Milwaukee, they expect that there are going to be city services here. If Komatsu, which has its North American headquarters, nearly $300 million development in the city of Milwaukee, if they're making that sort of investment, they're going to expect that there are city services that are available here. Pfizer Corporation, they could have gone anywhere. I mean, their CEO sits out east in New York, New Jersey. They've got a large office presence in Georgia, a large office presence in Nebraska as well. My administration worked with them. I wanted them to get to, yes, they did. Their global headquarters is going to be here, not terribly far from where we are now. They want for there to be city services available. Right Height, that's coming to the city. They want to make sure that there are city services available. The housing that we've seen, we got 3 towers that are 30 stories or above that are getting ready to be under construction or near construction. They want to make sure that there are city services that are available too. So if you don't have city services, then those investments are going to be in jeopardy. And the other thing here too, like this is what we continually try to get folks to understand. If Milwaukee does well, then everybody else does well. If those businesses are not making those investments in Milwaukee, then those wages, those incomes, those corporations are not being taxed. If those corporations are not being taxed, that's less money going into the coffers in Madison, right? So what happens here is beneficial not just for the city, it's beneficial for the region, it's beneficial for the entire state. And one more point about the Republican National Convention, right? Wisconsin is critically important in presidential elections for Democrats and Republicans, right? If it were not for the fact that the city of Milwaukee is in the state of Wisconsin, the Democratic National Convention, as important as Wisconsin is to Democrats nationally running for president, would never have come here. If it were not for the city of Milwaukee and all the amenities and the city services that we provide, if we were not here, then there's no way, as critically important as Wisconsin is for Republicans, there's no way that the RNC comes to Milwaukee in 2024, right? So I think everybody's got to understand that when Milwaukee is in its best position, when we make investments in this city, when Milwaukee does well, then the entire state of Wisconsin benefits from that.
And the only thing I would add is that if you're interested, MMAC and GMC has been great when you think about bringing more businesses along. But we not only have local coalition partners, but we also have statewide coalition partners. So I would encourage you to visit the MoveForwardMKE.com website where you can actually pull some of the quotes from businesses that are supporting these efforts.
One last question. Allison, it's you.
I wanted to talk really briefly about the assumed rate of return. So whether or not you get a sales tax, if this bill passes, that decreases the assumed rate of return to meet WRS. Yep. That is a huge part of why the city is in the problem, I guess, situation that it is right now. What are you guys doing on this issue? Because that seems like it sets both the city and county up for a really difficult financial future if you don't get a sales tax.
Well, much like the memorandum, the maintenance of effort, rather, that you mentioned earlier, that goes into effect either way. So too would us dropping the assumed rate of return from our present assumed rate of return down to 6.8. Yeah, those minor changes in the assumed rate of return accounts for millions and millions and millions of additional dollars that we'd have to put into our pension system. So without these additional dollars that would be available to us via the sales taxes at the city of Milwaukee and Milwaukee County too, we'd face increased costs because of the change in the assumed rate of return.
So what happens then? I mean, if you can't cut cops and you have your costs going through the roof, what happens?
The same sort of thing that I mentioned earlier as it relates to the maintenance of effort. I mean, it's adding more money to a cash-strapped governmental unit that can't afford to pay it, and so it quickens the financial spiral.
And the same is, similar for Milwaukee County, but we just not too long ago actually lowered our assumed rate of return to 7%. And so the 0.2% will definitely be a hit, not as much as it would be to the city of Milwaukee. But again, if we are going to find ways to preserve our current pension system, making sure we take care of our obligations of those who have worked for the city of Milwaukee County, and be able to make the proper investments moving forward, the pension reform that's a part of this package is going to be it's extremely needed. And so we need the additional dollars to make sure that we can take care of those extra costs.
It doesn't, the decreased assumed rate of return for the county, doesn't that go into effect in like 2026?
I believe so.
Okay, so this would potentially take you from 7.5.
Absolutely, but with the additional increase in the dollars that we will receive, it will give us the ability to be on a better fiscal path.
But if you don't have the
But if we
sales
don't,
tax-
oh, absolutely. I mean, again, the worst thing that can happen is inaction. Again, not just for us, but for the entire state.
Mayor Johnson and Executive Crowley, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope this is the first of many conversations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.